It's time for the Property Podcast, where every week tens of thousands of property investors, new and experienced, join together to get news, knowledge and laughs at our expense. With me, Rob Bence.
And me, Rob Dix. Join us every Thursday morning for your weekly dose of property ideas and motivation. Then head over to our website at thepropertypodcast.com to keep the conversation going. Now though, let's get started.
Hello everyone and welcome to the Property Podcast. It's episode 138. Yes, we're back. You probably guessed who. It's myself, Rob B, but even more delightful, I'm joined by Rob D.
Oh, very nice of you to say so. This is clearly a good start to our relationship, and relationships are what we're talking about today. Yes, for some reason, we're in the business of dealing out relationship advice today. You've not tuned into the wrong podcast. We are talking about how to talk to your partner about property, which is a topic that comes up a lot, and I think it's worth talking about. While we are certainly not marriage counsellors by any means, we're probably more qualified to talk about this than we are about property, because we've made bad investment decisions in the past, but we haven't made a bad marriage decision yet. So we've got that. We've got a cracking resource of the week, as always, contributed by a listener. And most excitingly of all, we're getting out and about tonight, Rob.
We are. So I'm in Liverpool. So if you're picking this up today on the day it goes out on the Thursday and you're in the Liverpool Merseyside region, then do get along to the Pump House in Liverpool this evening. All the details will be on the propertyhub.net/meetups. But Rob, you're in Nottingham.
Yeah, in between Nottingham and Derby at the meetup that's going on there just by junction 24 of the M1. Do get along to that. There's no competitiveness about whether more people turn up in Nottingham or in Liverpool, we promise. But we would love to see you there, or make it along to any other of the meetups that are going on tonight. There's got about 12 of them to choose from. And as Rob said, if you go to thepropertyhub.net/meetups, you can see where all of those are taking place. If you are listening to this on the day, it's not too late. You can still book your place. It's completely free. You just need to register in advance. So the propertyhub.net/meetups is the place to do that.
Right, so it's time for our news story of the week. And the government wants us to pay more taxes and do more work. Oh, beautiful, aren't they? Rob, right to rent. We are now immigration officers as well as landlords?
Yes, we are. So we've talked about this on the podcast before. This was a pilot scheme that was running in the West Midlands. And in typical government fashion, before they've really assessed the results of the pilot study, I don't think it was particularly successful by the measures that I've seen. They're rolling it out nationwide anyway. So from the 1st of February, landlords or agents have got to check that their tenants have a right to be in the UK, which involves checking their documents, which, I mean, you should be checking identity anyway, but to be in the business of trying to work out what's fraudulent and what isn't, and whether people have got the right visa and all the rest of it, it all seems a bit of a faff. I'm sure that as time goes on, better guides will be published and you'll just make it part of your process and it will be just another thing. But it is a bit annoying. It's just yet another thing to do as part of the admin move-in process. And annoying that it's sort of been done without really any consultation and without seeing whether the pilot was successful. But there you go. What can you do? The details of this in full, we're linking to the RLA website where David Smith, who's a prominent property solicitor, has written a piece about this explaining what it is and his thoughts on it. And so that link is going to be in the show notes for today's episode, which are at thepropertyhub.net/talk-to-your-partner.
So, Rob, let's do it. We've got the meetups happening tonight. And actually, the loose topic, you can talk about what you want, but there will be a loose discussion around this topic today. So feel free to make notes. Feel free to bring your opinions to the meetups tonight, because, as we said, people will bring this up and discuss it. So let us know what you think at the meetups, if you're in Liverpool or Nottingham, or if not, go to the show notes and leave comments there. But Rob, what's this all about? Talking to your partner about property. Surely it's a no-brainer.
Well, it's a topic that comes up so often at summits and meetups as well. But whenever we do the summit, because we're talking to people about what their goals are around property, people often bring up the fact that their partner is either resistant to it or has a difference of opinion about what the strategy should be. One chap actually wanted to put as one of his quarterly goals, change my partner. But we think we managed to talk him out of that one. But it does happen. It's a discussion that really needs to take place because obviously if you're going hell for leather to try and accomplish a certain thing and your partner isn't on board with that, that's going to cause issues at some point. So it's a discussion that needs to happen early and it needs to happen in the right way. So we've got some tips about how to have that discussion and how to bring your partner on board. So let's get started, shall we?
Yeah, I regret putting that goal down now, Rob, but I'm glad you talked me out of it. She doesn't listen, so she'll never know about my bad jokes. Right, okay, so talking to your partner about property. Number one, rather than plastering pictures of fast cars and exotic holiday islands and this is what you can have, actually do the opposite and talk about what happens if we don't invest. Now, make sure this is a proper conversation and not just, passing in the hallway. Sit down and really talk about it and get the numbers out. Because the answer may come back, well, we've got pensions, haven't we? Well, if you have, that's great. But how much are they going to provide for you? Dig the papers out, dig the documents out. Because unless you're on a final salary pension or you're chunking in huge sums of money, chances are a pension alone isn't going to be enough. We are in a pension crisis. It's a topic I used to talk about a lot until I realised I put a lot of people to sleep. But it's something I'm actually quite passionate about, how bad the pension crisis is, but also how few people realise it. So that's why I talked about it so much. And maybe a future podcast, Rob, a relook at it. However, look at where you're at and look at, if you carry on as you are, what will happen when you retire? And if you haven't got a pension, then gosh, even worse, what are you going to do? Just hope money falls out the sky? Have this conversation. Sit down and talk about it properly. Don't put it off and go, oh, it'll be fine or we'll sort it out. That won't happen. You need to take action. So talking about the consequences of not investing rather than the benefits actually may be the trigger that they need to start investigating this. Doesn't mean they're going to run into the estate agents and buy 4 properties, but it may mean that they're willing to open up to further discussion.
Yeah, I'd say that probably the majority of people have their head in the sand about what they're going to do about their pension. And so there's a very good chance that your partner will be one of them. So starting the ball rolling by talking about the consequences is definitely a good idea. Moving on from that, if you have a positive discussion around that and you sort of make them realise, oh yeah, we do need to be doing something here, or even if you think you're going to be okay for your retirement, even if you you have a discussion, it's like, well, do we both really want to be working as hard as we are now until we're 65 or whatever it is? Having had that discussion and planted that seed, you might want to introduce him to some of the classic books that form a light bulb moment for a lot of people. So Rich Dad, Poor Dad, obviously, is the one that probably is the one that's name-checked by most investors. The Richest Man in Babylon is another one that I haven't actually read, but that comes up a lot as well as changing people's mindset around these things. Even if it's a 4-hour work week, it shouldn't really be about property. I should probably plug my books at this point, but I don't think it's a good idea to get the property books out at this stage. It's more about setting the landscape for it and getting them thinking about other ways of doing things. So you don't just have to sort of work your whole life, pay into a pension, and then hope you've got enough at the end. There are other ways of doing things, and property might form part of that. But first of all, just kind of set that scene. So either get them reading the books or put on the audiobook on a long drive or something like that. And I think that could be a really helpful part of kind of priming them for the property discussion. Completely
agree. And yes, Rob, the property books are sort of the next stage after that. But at that point, just opening your mind to wealth concepts is a really big step. And we often comment, it's amazing how many people we talk to that say, actually, it was Rich Dad, Poor Dad or similar books that gave them that light bulb moment. It's incredible, really, the amount of people. Once you've gone and done that and they're starting to open up to the idea, you then can look at future goals. Now, we've talked about goals a lot on the podcast, and we're not going to go back over old ground today. Hopefully, you've listened to those podcasts and carried out the course on the Property Hub, which is free. So if you haven't, make sure you do. But you should be carrying those exercises out, especially what we discussed in the course, with your partner, and go through with them and say, right, okay, what do we want in the future? What's our ideal lifestyle? And you may go, then what's our dream lifestyle? You may go big, and that's fine. You don't have to. It's up to you. But you cost that out. Set your goals and make them real. By writing it down and costing them out and putting a time frame on it will make it all become very real very quickly and give a lot of drive and enthusiasm to the whole project. You then need to start taking action, of course, but writing goals down and making it real for you and your partner will really move it forward another step again.
Definitely. Now, having been through all these steps, it's probably time to start gently talking about the idea of property at this stage. And property can be scary because you're talking about taking on another debt to buy the property with, unless you're buying it all in cash. And it's just something that people don't understand. And when you don't understand something, the natural human reaction is to reject it. If you just sort of dive straight into your massive kind of portfolio building kind of like, and in 10 years, we'll have 20 properties bringing in this much, then it's very easy for the other person to go, no, don't get it. So no, veto. Instead, if you just talk through the numbers of a typical investment, you'll start making them realize that actually everything's accounted for and it's not as risky as you first thought. So just show like you'd have on your spreadsheet for analyzing a deal. Just look at, okay, well, here's the rent that's coming in. Here is what the mortgage would be. Now, I know you're going to say that the mortgage rate might go up, so I've costed it in at a higher percentage. So here it is. Here's an allowance for voids. Here's an allowance for this and that and the other and repairs. And show that there's money left over at the end. And so at the end, you've got £200 a month. Wouldn't that be brilliant? And then obviously over time, most people don't need to be convinced that property prices grow over time because that's sort of quite ingrained in us. And just make them realize that it's not that scary. Understanding the concept of investing in property is very, very simple because there's the capital growth part and then there's the income part. There's two ways of making money. And the sort of monthly income part, once you've seen the money coming in and you've allowed for the expenses going out, it's quite hard to argue with. It's quite compelling to just sit down and go through those numbers. So don't go nuts straight away. Just talk through the basic numbers. And I think at this stage, as with all the stages, don't push it too hard. I think that's why it's important to bring your partner on board quite early. So before you're ready to pull the trigger and execute some super ambitious plan, by that point, you'll just want to get on with it and you'll be frustrated and you'll be trying to drag them along with you. If you start this conversation early, then you'll be able to go through all of this and make sure that they're just as excited as you are by the time that you want to go for it.
If you haven't done a deal before and you're struggling with the numbers and what to put down, if you go to the RMP website, there's an past examples page, so nothing current, so it's not trying to sell you anything. You just have a look at past examples. If you put your details in there, one of the team will send you past cash flows and also research documents as well, which will probably give your partner more comfort as well. So I'll link to it in the show notes if you want to pick that up for free as a resource. Next, get them to write down all their concerns and work through them so you can minimize their fears. Because actually, in property, if you list out everything that can go wrong, you can then say, right, and this is what we can do about it to reduce those risks or eliminate it completely. In fact, Rob, that could be a good podcast in the future. All the risks in property and how to remove them. So listen out for that in the future. But by doing that exercise yourself and having a crack yourself, you'll actually find that there's not a lot to be worried about if you take certain steps and precautions. So there are risks, of course, and there always will be risks, but you can drastically reduce those risks by sometimes just taking a different strategic approach or just implementing one little different tactic, and then suddenly that risk is gone or considerably minimized. So go through that exercise because they probably still have those doubts, those fears. So again, it's one of those times where you're going to sit down, write it out, work together. But, this is a big decision you're making investing in property. It's not like going and buying a washing machine or a new toaster. We're talking about big sums of money. So if you're going to do this, it's worth taking the time to do these exercises.
After that, a good next step, bring them to a meetup. So you don't have to bring them along tonight. Maybe you're not going to go through these previous steps quite that quickly, but getting them along to a meetup, obviously it doesn't have to be a Property Hub one, but any kind of event is a really good idea because it'll make them realize that all types of people are property investors and get to hear their views too. So they won't think that you've suddenly gone mental and it's just kind of the idea has popped up in your head and you're going for it completely apropos of nothing. They'll realize that lots of people are property investors and there's a very good reason for that because everyone that they speak to will have a different story about how they started and why they're doing it, but there'll be enough commonality that they'll go, oh yeah, I totally see where this is coming from, and why this is something that people do. And also if they had any kind of stereotypes in their head about what a property investor looked like or the kind of person they were, that'll be squashed straight away. Because when you go to the meetups, everyone is very different. You wouldn't be able to walk down the street and know who was a property investor and who wasn't. And if you thought that they were all really like aggressive, hard-charging people, you'll be put straight on that straight away. Because all the people that we meet and being out and about at meetups and everything else, majority of them are just such nice people. Such normal people, people who have just had this sort of light bulb moment and realize that they want something a bit different and they want to take control of their life and their future. And by being put into that situation, I think someone who was sort of maybe on the fence about it, but still have some kind of historical in-ground views that perhaps aren't accurate and aren't helpful can be put straight on that very easily. So coming along to a meetup, not something you want to do straight away without doing a bit of groundwork, but I think a really good idea for by the time you've started having these serious conversations and it's something that you're on the verge of thinking about.
So you've talked about the alternatives, you've introduced them to the classic books, you've goal set, you've gone through a typical investment, you've gone through the concerns, you've come along to a fabulous meetup, and then what better way to finally seal the deal than introduce them to the Property Podcast? Surely that will be the killer move. Well, maybe all your good work will be undone. But actually, if you start them off with the How to Become a Property Investor series, which of course we'll link to in the show notes, that's going to be a really good starting place. So a little while back, we did a multi-part series on how to become a property investor. And it's super useful for people who are new to it. If you're new and you're just picking this up for the first time, go back and listen as well. It's a great resource. It's part of the podcast. Of course, it's free. Take advantage of it, because that will really outline everything you need to know, the basics at least, the foundations, to then go and move forward from there. And then hopefully, if they like the podcast, they can leave a nice 5-star review too.
Well, how restrained was that? We got to the very last step before recommending they listen to the podcast. But there's a good reason for that. We noticed that we got a very long way into that sort of process before talking about property. And that's because property can seem scary. It can seem like another world. It can seem hard to understand. So it's not the best starting place. But also, it's not even the most important bit. Getting the right attitude, the right mindset, and making that shift is the most important part. So that's the bit to tackle first, and the rest comes later. Hopefully we've put together a nice, like, unintimidating avenue for people to learn about property, but you have to be in the right space before you start thinking about that kind of thing. So I hope that was helpful. Lots of links in there to various bits, which will all be in the show notes at thepropertyhub.net/talktoyourpartner. That is going to be the theme of the meetups tonight. So we're going to have a theme every month. It's not the only thing that's going to be talked about, but it's just to give you a starting point. If you're nervous about going along and you're not sure how to start a conversation with people, it kind of gives you something like, did you hear the podcast? What do you think about this? So that will be being talked about at all the meetups tonight. And just to wrap up, if we can give a bit of genuine relationship advice to finish the topic, probably not a good idea. But if you haven't got a partner yet, I'd say that when you do, making sure that you're on the same page about money and financial matters and life plans and stuff at the very outset is really important. Because I think, Rob, we're both very lucky to have partners who share our views on things and have similar attitudes towards money and all that kind of thing. And so many problems in relationships come from people who've got completely opposite views. So if you're wanting to save every penny to put into investments and your partner just wants to spend it all on golf or whatever their hobby might be, that's going to be a source of friction. So the earlier in the process you can get onto the same page about all this stuff, the better off you're going to be.
Agreed. Next week on the Relationship Podcast, no, only joking. All right. Actually, even better than that, we've got a resource of the week, Rob, but we don't even have to do it because Mark Morris, leader of the Manchester meetup, which is going really well, that's also running tonight. So make sure you check that out. You can check them all out, as we said, at the Property Hub /meetups. Go to that link. You can see where all these locations are. If you're listening to today, then try and get along. If not, make sure you book yourself in for next month. You don't want to miss out. Super friendly, really good fun. Mark leads the Manchester meetup, and he's left us a tip.
Hi, Rob and Rob. Mark Morris here. just following on from your Lettings Law, What You Need to Know podcast last week, another great podcast. Maybe just a tip for landlords, it may be a possible resource of the week. My local fire service, Manchester Fire Service, are offering home safety checks. You could just ask your tenants to contact the local fire service for a home safety check. They'll come out, do the inspection. If it needs any additional fire smoke alarms, they'll fit that for you free of charge. It also ensures that you've got proof that you're following the legislation. Okay, cheers, Rob and Rob.
Well, thank you very much for that, Mark. I know from past conversations with him that he's the master of getting freebies from his council. Not saying he's tight. I'm just saying he knows what's out there. And that seems like another really great idea. So there is this new legislation to comply with. And if you can get a helping hand in doing that, both financially and logistically, then why not? So thank you very much for that, Mark. Very much appreciated.
No, definitely not tight. He keeps trying to entice me up to Manchester with an offer of a pint. So
actually, he bought me dinner. I've just remembered he's absolutely not tight. So he's taking these savings and putting them into buying me food, which is the best possible use for them.
Yeah, and if he's going to invest it in beer for me, then I'm happy too. So I'll definitely be the Manchester meetup in the new year. Right. That's not meaning that all meetup leaders now need to buy us food and drink to get us to come. We will anyway. Right. Time for our review of the week. And we will buy you a virtual meal or pint if you leave us a review, because obviously we can't pass it over the podcast. And this review comes from James. And James says, there are many famous duos, Sherlock and Dr. Watson, the two Ronnies, but Rob and Rob should definitely take the spotlight when it comes to property investment duos. Amazing team. Keep up the good work. Thank you, James. That's great. I really appreciate it.
Does that mean we outrank Phil and Kirsty? That's quite something.
If we do. But who's Kirsty and who's Phil? We'll talk off air, yeah.
Let's not get into this. Moving swiftly on. Thank you for that review, though. Very much appreciated. That's us for this week. We've got to get off to some meetups. But next week, we're going to be back. Of course we are. Well, we're actually going to be back on Tuesday with Ask Rob and Rob. But then on Thursday, we're zooming back in to a more kind of typical property-related subject. We're going to be talking about how to get your property let fast. Some tips for that coming up next week.
Well, looking forward to it. Looking forward to meeting people tonight. If you're there, can't wait to chat property. But we'll be chatting property with you regardless if you're there or not on Tuesday and Thursday, as Rob said. So until then, everyone, have a great evening if you're at the meetups, and we'll catch you next week. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thanks for listening to The Property Podcast. Make sure you join our mailing list at thepropertypodcast.com.
And remember, we love 5-star reviews. Rob even loves them more than air miles.